I trust you with my life, Kader. Not just my life, but the soul of this country. Those words echoed in Sergeant Kader Zongo's mind as he stood silently beside the young, resolute President Ibrahim Traoré inside the grand chamber of the presidential villa in Ouagadougou. The room was filled with subdued opulence, gold-trimmed chairs, thick maroon curtains, and high ceilings where chandeliers hung like frozen lightning. Outside, thousands chanted Ibrahim's name. But inside, a different kind of war brewed. Kader wasn't just a bodyguard. He had been there since Traoré's military rise, since the revolution that ousted Western-backed elites. He had taken bullets, intercepted car bombs, and once pulled the president out of a river ambush with one arm shattered. Their bond wasn't formed in peace but baptized in fire. But tonight was strange. President Ibrahim's voice was slower. His eyes, normally like sharpened steel, flickered as if the fire in him dimmed. Kader noticed. He noticed everything. "Sir, your tea." A young aide handed the cup to Ibrahim. As always, Kader tasted it first. That was the drill. He took a small sip and nodded. The president drank. Minutes later, Ibrahim gripped the armrest of his chair. Sweat glistened on his temple. His throat clenched like an invisible rope tightened around it. Kader stepped forward, alarmed. "Sir?" Ibrahim stood, then staggered. A wheeze escaped him. My chest." Kader lunged forward and caught him just before he collapsed. The villa descended into chaos. Medics were called. The emergency team stormed in. Ibrahim Traoré was rushed out on a stretcher, unconscious. The last thing Kader saw before the doors slammed shut was the half-empty cup of tea, and the trembling hands of the aide who served it. That night, the presidential press office told the world, President Traoré suffered a sudden cardiac complication. He is stable. But the truth was far more sinister. Because as the doctors worked to save the young African leader, Kader received a chilling message on a secure military line. No name. Just a voice disguised electronically. He wasn't supposed to die yet. You're ahead of schedule. Or did you forget who owns you, Sergeant Zongo? Kader froze. The weight of betrayal didn't hit him like thunder. It came like a silent, creeping fog. Because now, the man who once swore to protect the president was entangled in a web spun far beyond Burkina Faso. And the poison in that tea? It had his fingerprints. The corridor outside the presidential ICU was cold, too cold for Ouagadougou. Fluorescent lights flickered above Kader's head as he sat alone on the bench, his uniform collar stiff with sweat. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the call. His mind raced. The voice. That damn voice. Did you forget who owns you, Sergeant Zongo? 3 years ago, during a covert operation in Niger, Kader had been captured by a Western private intelligence firm. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they specialized in coercing loyalty through secrets, threats, and surgical blackmail. Kader never told anyone. Not even Traoré. They spared his life on one condition. When the time comes, you will do what we ask, without questions. He thought the time would never come. Until now. A soft buzz came from his encrypted burner phone. Another message. One line. Phase 2 begins at 0400. Do not deviate. Kader stood up fast, pacing. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a tiny black capsule. A slow-release neurotoxin, colorless and undetectable in small doses. He hadn't meant for it to be administered yet. It was a warning, not an execution. But something had gone wrong. You poisoned him, his conscience hissed. You tried to kill the one man who truly trusted you. His eyes burned with fury, at himself, at the faceless puppet masters, at the machine that had infiltrated the revolution they built with blood and conviction. A nurse walked by and gave him a pitiful glance. He's stable. But not out of danger, she said quietly. Kader swallowed hard. He wanted to punch the wall. Suddenly the aide from earlier, young, wiry, trembling, was escorted into the hallway by 2 military men. One of them, Colonel Babu, a blunt, unforgiving warhound loyal to the old guard, walked over to Kader. We're interrogating the aide, Babu said. He confessed the tea came from the kitchen, but the chain of command is broken. There's no way to trace the toxin. Kader nodded slowly, trying not to show anything on his face. Let me talk to him first, he said. Babu raised an eyebrow. You sure? Yes, Kader replied. I have a feeling this goes deeper than the kitchen. They brought the boy into a side room. Kader followed. The door shut behind them. Sit, Kader ordered. The aide's lip quivered. I didn't mean. They told me it was a vitamin blend for energy. I swear I didn't know. Kader crouched in front of him. Who told you? I don't know. I never saw their faces. They called me from a blocked line. They said it was for the president's health. They transferred $5,000 to my account. Did they threaten you? A slow nod. Cater's jaw tightened. This wasn't a kitchen conspiracy. This was a surgical strike. And someone wanted Traoré gone, fast. But the West didn't want him dead just yet. They wanted him crippled. Politically, physically, nationally. The poison wasn't the goal. It was just the beginning. Rain lashed against the tinted windows of the armored SUV as Cater stared out, lost in thought. The city was tense. Sirens echoed in the distance and armored patrols dotted the capital like watchful sentinels. Rumors swirled. Was President Traoré alive? Was there a coup? Only a few knew the truth. Cater gripped the steering wheel. The burner phone buzzed again. This time a different message. Report to the U.S. Embassy. Ask for Mr. Leroux. Level -2. 1,500 hours. No delays. He clenched his teeth. Mr. Leroux. That was a name he'd hoped never to hear again. The last time he met Leroux was in Bamako, inside a classified black site. Cater had been strapped to a chair for 28 hours, interrogated by Leroux himself. But instead of bullets, Leroux used knowledge. About Cater's mother's illness, his younger brother's student visa application, his own military file. That's how the West worked now. Not with tanks. With leverage. At 1450, Cater pulled into a secure entrance behind the embassy. He passed 2 gates, flashed his fake diplomatic ID, and was escorted into the belly of the compound. Level -2 was a windowless corridor of cement and silence. A steel door slid open. And there he was. Mr. Leroux, tall, pale, dressed in a beige suit with eyes that looked like winter. He smiled without warmth. Cater, he said. You're early. That's discipline. Cater said nothing. Leroux motioned to a chair. President Traoré is still breathing. That wasn't the plan. You never said kill him, Cater snapped. I said disable him, Leroux corrected. We needed him off the board. Just long enough for Operation Aegis to succeed. What is Operation Aegis? Leroux chuckled. Let's just say the gold beneath the Sahel is far more valuable than the flags flying above it. And Traoré, he's been a stubborn firewall. But with him comatose, a temporary interim government can open new doors. Business doors. You want to install a puppet. We want peace, Leroux said with mock sincerity. And peace requires predictability. You Africans love your revolutions, but investors don't. Now, did you wipe the cameras? Cater stared at him. Yes. And the cup? Burned. Good. Your family is safe, by the way. Just in case you were wondering. Cater's hands balled into fists. You told me this was the last favor. One job. Leroux stood fixing his suit. It's always one job. Until the next one. He stepped closer, voice cold and flat. You're not just in this, Cater. You are this. Cater turned and walked out, his blood boiling. As he emerged into the daylight, the wind hit his face. He felt dirtier than any battlefield he'd ever fought on. But a fire had begun to burn in his chest. Because now he knew. Traoré wasn't just a target. He was the last defense. And Cater would either redeem himself, or destroy everything trying. 3 days had passed since the poisoning. The presidential villa had become a fortress. Security doubled, then tripled. The corridors, once ceremonial and echoing with aides and advisors, were now patrolled by silent men with fingers always near triggers. Cater stood just outside the president's private ICU suite, staring through the observation glass. President Traoré lay unconscious, surrounded by beeping machines. Tubes snaked from his body like vines of survival. The doctors said the toxin had paralyzed his motor responses, but his brainwaves were active. He was trapped inside his body. A prisoner in his own flesh. Cater couldn't shake the guilt. The man who trusted him now lay there, helpless because of him. Yet, what haunted him more wasn't what he had done, it was what Leroux was planning next. He needed information. Real information. And he had a lead. Cater entered the surveillance control room. Pull all security logs from the West Wing for the day of the poisoning, he ordered. A young technician hesitated. Sir, we already reviewed those. Pull them again. This time with facial heat mapping and echo wave analysis. The boy obeyed. As the footage played, Cater watched every face. Staff, cooks, drivers, military. But one man caught his eye. A janitor. Older. Limping slightly. Face partially hidden. He wasn't in the official log. Pause, Cater barked. Zoom. Enhance that frame. The technician blinked. He's not staff. Not registered. Cater's heart pounded. Run him through the AFRICOM facial index. Seconds later, a match flashed on screen. Name, Martin Fielding. Citizenship, UK. Status, MI6 Black Asset classified. Known aliases, Frederick Kane, Leo Brooks, Janice. British intelligence? On site? So LaRue wasn't alone. The CIA MI6, they were both in it. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about Africa. Control. Cater leaned in. Get me every camera angle of this man. I want to know where he went, who he touched, what he touched. And who let him in. The technician hesitated. Sir, with respect, should we be doing this without clearance from Colonel Bubbo? Cater turned slowly. Do you think Bubbo wants Traoré to wake up? The room went quiet. That night, Cater received another encrypted message. But this time it wasn't from LaRue. It was from a burner number registered in Dakar. You're in too deep. Meet me at 3 o'clock. Alley behind UN Warehouse 17. Come alone. Attached was a photo, grainy, taken through a scope, of Cater shaking hands with LaRue. Cater stared at it in horror. Someone was watching him. Whoever it was had surveillance capabilities far beyond the presidential security team. The hunter was being hunted. And the truth? It wasn't just a weapon anymore. It had become a trap. The Ouagadougou night was restless, thick with humidity and suspicion. Cater parked his unmarked vehicle 2 blocks away from Warehouse 17 and continued on foot. The industrial district was mostly abandoned at this hour, except for a few flickering security lights and the low drone of a distant generator. His heartbeat kept tempo with his footsteps. This could be a trap. The alley behind the warehouse was silent. Damp walls towered above him and shadows clung to the corners like ghosts. Zongo, a voice whispered. Cater spun around. A woman stepped out from the darkness, hands raised slightly. She was cloaked in a dark hijab, but her eyes, fierce, intelligent, gave her away. Nia Diallo, Cater breathed. A legend. Ex-French intelligence turned rogue. Half the agencies in the West had wanted her captured for over a decade. She vanished after exposing a weapons deal between France and a West African dictator. No one had seen her in 6 years. You're alive. Barely, she said. And so is your president. But not for long. She tossed him a small USB drive. That's every communication between LaRue, MI6's Janice, and their field assets across West Africa. Recorded from a compromised satellite relay. Including orders to you. Cater's stomach turned. Why are you helping me? Because Traoré was a chance, she said. A chance to prove Africa didn't have to sell its soul to survive. And now, the same people who colonized our grandfathers are trying to colonize our governments, with handshakes and contracts instead of chains. Cater looked at the drive. This could bring them down. She nodded. If you live long enough to use it. Suddenly, a red laser danced across Nia's chest. Then another on Cater's forehead. Snipers. Move, she shouted, shoving him behind a metal crate. The silence shattered, gunshots erupted, whizzing through the alley like hornets. Cater returned fire, covering Nia as she rolled for cover. A black van screeched around the corner, back doors flying open. 3 masked men emerged, heavily armed. They're not police, Nia shouted, loading a magazine. That's LaRue's kill squad. Cater gritted his teeth, heart pounding. Then let's disappoint them. He fired a smoke grenade from his belt launcher. Thick plumes swallowed the alley. In the chaos, he grabbed Nia's hand, and they bolted through the back of the warehouse, bullets chasing their heels. Inside they found an old drainage tunnel. Rusty, narrow, reeking, but it led out to the highway. Just as they emerged on the other end, Nia collapsed, clutching her side. She'd been hit. Cater pulled her into cover behind a concrete barrier. Her breathing was shallow. I'm not going to make it, she whispered. You have to finish this. Nia. Use the drive. Expose them. Make Africa see. Cater's jaw clenched. He took the drive, pocketed it. Then he did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He swore. Not to a flag, not to a uniform. To the truth. The next morning, Cater returned to the presidential villa under a different name and uniform. Disguised as an intelligence officer from the Bureau of External Affairs, he passed 3 checkpoints with forged clearance and the confidence of a man who had everything to lose. He walked straight to the presidential study. The room was untouched. Thick carpets muffled his steps. On the walls hung revolutionary portraits of African freedom fighters, Lumumba, Sankara, Cabral. This was where President Ibrahim Traoré spent his quietest hours. It was also the one room not under military surveillance, by the president's personal instruction. He locked the door behind him. Then he went to the large mahogany desk and opened the third drawer from the bottom left. Exactly where he remembered. Inside was a sealed envelope. His name was handwritten on the front. To Kader, my brother before the bullet. Kader's fingers trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a letter, dated just 3 weeks before the poisoning. If you're reading this, then something has happened to me. But I knew it was coming. The vultures have been circling ever since we said no to France's uranium contract, no to America's intelligence base, and no to the IMF's colonial loan terms. I didn't betray them. I only chose my people over their profit. I see it in your eyes, Kader. You've been carrying something heavy. Secrets. Maybe even guilt. But I never doubted your loyalty. That's why I asked them to put this letter here. Because when they come for me, you'll be the last one standing. Expose them. Even if it costs you your name. Even if it costs us everything. Africa must know the truth. Tears welled in Kader's eyes. He sat down in the president's leather chair, fists clenched around the letter. The weight of it all crashed down on him, not just the betrayal, not just the geopolitics, but the intimacy of trust. Traoré had known. He'd sensed the storm coming. And still he chose to believe in him. A soft knock shattered the silence. Colonel Babu entered without waiting. You shouldn't be here, Zongo. Kader didn't move. Babu stepped closer, lips tight. They're planning to announce Traoré's transfer of power to a transitional committee. Headed by me. Kader stood slowly. You're in on it. Babu didn't deny it. You think this country survives without compromise? You think the West will just let us lead ourselves? Kader's voice dropped. He trusted us. He was a boy playing king. And now the adults are taking the throne. Kader looked down at the letter. Then up at the man who once called Traoré comrade. I'll give you one chance, Babu, Kader said. Step down. Or I'll bring down everything. Babu laughed. You don't have the balls. Kader's silence was answer enough. He had the drive. He had the letter. And for the first time since the poisoning, he had a plan. 2 nights later, under the cover of darkness, Kader activated a war protocol that had never been used before. Operation Black Echo. It was a fail-safe system built into Burkina Faso's military communications network, coded by Traoré himself for use only in the event of internal sabotage by top-level officers. No one knew it existed. Except Kader. In a secured underground military server room, deep beneath the Ministry of Defense, Kader input a series of encrypted commands. The servers hummed to life. Secure lines opened. Dormant receivers scattered across the Sahel crackled online. In less than 30 minutes, hidden military units from across the country were receiving the signal. Loyalists. Young officers who had risen with Traoré. Men and women who remembered the revolution. They'd been waiting for this day. Kader's message was broadcast across the internal military channel. This is Captain Kader Zongo. President Traoré has been poisoned by internal conspirators supported by foreign operatives. Colonel Babu is attempting to seize control through a false transitional government. I have the evidence. I have the orders. This is not a drill. Mobilize Black Echo. Secure all state assets. Arrest any official attempting to declare emergency powers. The traitors are inside the palace. Across the country, encrypted confirmations flooded in. Black Echo received. Securing airstrip. Detaining interim council. Mobilizing northern base. The trap was set. Kader exited the bunker and headed for the national broadcast station. Dressed in civilian clothes and carrying both the USB drive and Traoré's handwritten letter, he had one goal: tell the people the truth, before the conspirators could silence him. But halfway there his car was blocked by 2 armored jeeps. Out stepped Colonel Babu and Mr. Leroux. Together. No more hiding. Leroux approached the vehicle, calm, professional. You made quite a mess, Kader. I underestimated your sense of loyalty. Kader stepped out of the car. You tried to poison a continent and thought we'd stay asleep? Babu raised a pistol. Hand over the drive. Kader didn't flinch. You shoot me, you'll never find it. Leroux sighed. Then we'll shoot every soldier you trained. Every journalist you contacted. Your mother. Your brother in Canada. We'll erase your legacy until there's nothing left. Kader's voice was steel. I already uploaded it. Every file. Every conversation. It's been sent to 50 independent journalists across Africa, and 3 embassies that aren't on your payroll. The truth's already out there. Leroux blinked. Babu's hand trembled on the gun. Kader smiled just slightly. And guess what? In the distance, sirens wailed. Black Echo troops surrounded the vehicles. Kader finished, I'm not the only one who remembers how to fight. Soldiers emerged from the shadows, rifles raised. Babu and LaRue were handcuffed on the spot. As they were dragged away, LaRue hissed, You think you've won? Kader replied, No. But for the first time in years, I think we finally started. The room was dimly lit, quiet but alive with tension. Monitors beeped steadily beside the president's bed, each beat echoing the fragile thread that still tethered him to life. Outside, the corridors had changed. No more nervous whispers of coups or foreign advisors roaming freely. The presidential villa had become a sanctuary again. Inside, Kader sat alone beside President Ibrahim Traoré, holding his hand. For a moment, he simply stared at the man who once lifted a battered nation onto his shoulders. A man who had offered Kader redemption before the world even knew he needed it. Then suddenly Traoré's fingers twitched. Kader froze. He leaned in closer. Ibrahim. The president's eyes fluttered. First once, then again. And finally they opened. Slowly. Blurred. But alive. Kader. Traoré croaked, his voice barely audible, his throat raw and dry. Tears welled in Kader's eyes as he gripped his commander's hand. Yes, I'm here. You're safe. They didn't win. Traoré blinked again, trying to understand. What happened? Kader exhaled slowly, then leaned in. You were poisoned. But not by strangers. It came from inside. Babu was working with LaRue, the CIA MI6. They tried to remove you. A flicker of recognition crossed the president's weak features. LaRue. I've handled it. We invoked Black Echo. The soldiers were loyal. Babu and LaRue are in custody. And Kader pulled out the folded letter and placed it in Ibrahim's hand. You were right about everything. Traoré's fingers closed over the page. His breath grew steadier, stronger. The machines around him reflected the shift. Life was coming back. Kader continued, The letter you wrote me, it gave me the strength to fight for something again. I exposed them. I exposed everything. A soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Sandrine, head of the Presidential Medical Unit, entered with a respectful nod. He's stabilizing fast, she whispered. His body is stronger than we expected. But he must rest. Kader nodded, standing. I'll give you space. As he turned to leave, Traoré rasped, Stay? Kader paused. Don't leave again, the president said. Not until we finish what we started. Kader nodded, eyes brimming. Outside the ICU, the country was already shifting. The streets were filled with citizens waving flags, not out of fear but hope. International journalists were broadcasting Kader's leaked files. In Dakar, Nairobi, Accra, people were demanding that their governments sever ties with Western shadow agencies. It had ignited a fire beyond Burkina Faso. The truth had not just saved one man. It had awakened a continent. And inside the villa, where betrayal once bloomed, loyalty had taken root once more. Kader sat back down beside the man he nearly lost. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe. This fight could be won. The grand chamber of the Supreme Military Court was overflowing. Journalists, international observers, military generals, diplomats, and civilians all packed into the historic hall that once held colonial governors. Now, for the first time in Burkina Faso's modern history, the court was not just a place of law, but of reckoning. At the center stood Colonel Babu and Mr. LaRue, both flanked by heavily armed security. Their expressions were blank, but their eyes betrayed the storm raging within. They had thought themselves untouchable, protected by geopolitics, corruption, and plausible deniability. But the files Kader leaked were damning. Over 350 pages of intercepted communications. Audio clips of Babu negotiating troop movements with foreign intelligence. Bank transactions between shell companies and foreign defense contractors. Even a memo titled, Projected Stability Timeline for Resource Control, Burkina Faso, Phase 1. It was no longer conspiracy. It was proof. Kader stood at the witness podium in full uniform. Metals polished, eyes sharp, voice unwavering. Colonel Babu used his proximity to the presidency to coordinate a silent coup with foreign partners, he declared. The objective was not only to remove President Traoré but to install a puppet regime favorable to Western mining contracts and military bases. A murmur swept through the room. LaRue smirked, arms folded. You Africans keep thinking the West cares enough to take over your governments. Truth is, we already own them. Gasps erupted. But Kader didn't blink. Not this one. LaRue leaned forward. You think exposing us changes anything? Within months they'll replace me. And someone worse will come. Cater locked eyes with him. Then we'll expose the next one. And the next. Until you stop underestimating us. The presiding judge, a stern woman named Justice Miriam Sankor, turned to the courtroom. Mr. LaRue, as a foreign agent operating without diplomatic status and involved in acts of espionage and attempted political subversion, you are hereby declared persona non grata and sentenced to indefinite detainment under international law pending tribunal transfer. She turned to Bobo. Colonel Bobo, your betrayal of your oath, your government, and your people has cost lives. You are hereby stripped of rank and sentenced to life imprisonment at Fata Ngurma Maximum Security Prison. There was no applause. Only silence. The kind of silence that follows a national exorcism. Later that night, President Traoré, now able to sit upright, addressed the nation from the steps of the presidential palace. Today we did not just survive a betrayal, we confronted our history. We stared into the eyes of those who treated our sovereignty like a chessboard and we did not blink. Cameras zoomed in as he turned to Cater, standing beside him. And to those who think our loyalty is for sale, know this, Africa remembers its enemies. But more importantly, it remembers its guardians. The city erupted in cheers. And Cater? He simply bowed his head. Not in shame, but in purpose fulfilled. 6 months later. The air in Ouagadougou was different now, charged not with fear but with determination. The streets were alive with murals, slogans, and the rhythmic beats of street musicians singing songs of resistance and rebirth. Traoré is not a man, one banner read, he is a movement. But behind every movement was always someone in the shadows. Someone like Cater Zongo. He sat beneath a baobab tree near the city's memorial square, dressed not in uniform but in civilian clothes. At peace. For the first time in decades, his gun was no longer within reach. Instead, he held a worn photo of himself and Traoré during their early days in uniform, dusty and proud, standing in front of a crumbling wall they'd once sworn to rebuild. The voice of President Traoré echoed from a nearby radio. Let history remember that when our enemies offered gold, we chose honor. When they offered comfort, we chose courage. And when one of our own nearly lost his way, he chose truth instead. Cater smiled faintly. The president was stronger now, both physically and politically. The recovery from the poisoning was nothing short of a miracle. And so was the resurrection of national trust. He had instituted reforms, stripped foreign contracts, launched Africa First infrastructure policies, and brought home hundreds of exploited assets once sold to multinational corporations. But Traoré didn't do it alone. Behind every speech, behind every reform there was Cater, still loyal but different now. A little boy ran up to him. Uncle Cater, are you really the one who caught the foreign ghosts? Cater laughed. Ghosts? That's what Mama calls them. The people who hide in suits and try to take our gold. Cater ruffled the boy's hair. Yes, I caught a few. But the real heroes are the ones who never gave up on this land. Just then Nia Diallo appeared, her side still healing but her fire undimmed. She wore a clean white scarf, her eyes bright. You never told me you were good with kids, she teased. I'm full of surprises, Cater replied. They both looked out toward the square where a new statue was being unveiled, not of Traoré but of a nameless soldier shielding a child from the storm. A symbol of all the unknown men and women who fought in silence. I thought about leaving, Cater said softly. Starting over somewhere quiet. But now, you found something worth staying for, Nia finished. He nodded. As the sun began to set, casting golden rays over the city, the radio crackled again. Let the world know, President Traoré said, Africa will no longer be silent. And those who protect her, not just in power but in spirit, will never be forgotten. Cater stood up, heart full. He didn't need medals, or parades, or speeches. His redemption was in the soil, in the eyes of the children, and in the silence that followed peace. He had once been a weapon, but now, he was a guardian.